Thank you. Okay. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for coming today, for Karen for doing this, and the amazing presenters we've had so far. Now, who has ever heard the phrase situation ethics? Okay. Now, situation ethics is the dominant ethical system in America today. It basically means that anything you do, as long as you do it in a spirit of love, is okay. Now, if you steal because your children are starving, that's an act of love, and that's morally okay. If you have the cheating husband who has a mistress, well, it's morally okay if he loves that mistress, because he's in an unloved marriage. So that's morally okay. You know, the pastor that gets up in front of his church and refuses to talk about controversial issues because he loves his church and he doesn't want to divide his church and he doesn't want to destroy his church and so he can't pay the mortgage, that's morally okay because he does it in a spirit of love. So where did situation ethics come from? Because through most of American Western history, people believed that ethics came from God, right? They were in the Ten Commandments. They were in the Bible. There were very clear and very fixed rules of social behaviour. And they were divinely inspired. They were revealed to us. Well, a man called Joseph Fletcher, who was a lecturer, a professor at Harvard Divinity School and the Episcopalian Divinity School, wrote a book in 1966, Situation Ethics, and he turned American Christianity on its head. And it was basically anything you do is okay as long as you do it in a spirit of love. And that was perfectly timed for Marcuse and Gramsci and the revolution of the 60s, because everybody wanted to do everything and they thought, well, now we can do it because if we do it with love, it's okay. So it really transformed American culture. Now, Joseph Fletcher, he helped to set up Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger. You've probably heard of her. He helped to set up several euthanasia-based societies. And after he'd written his transformational work, he left the church, proclaimed himself an atheist, and advocated for post-birth abortion up to 9 or 10 years old for retarded children. Joseph Fletcher was a lifelong communist. He worked in the labour unions before he went to theological college. There is testimony that you can look up online by Herb Philbrick, who infiltrated the Boston Communist Party for 9 years for the FBI, how he worked closely with Joseph Fletcher through that time, that Fletcher did all sorts of tasks for the Communist Party, and that he... And Fletcher also attended several Communist Front events. He was involved with the World Peace Council, which was a Stalinist front. So a communist transformed the morals of America. A communist, a hardcore Stalinist, gave every cowardly pastor, every cheating husband, every embezzler, every thief an excuse for their behaviour. And he transformed this country, folks. And just think of the implications too. If it's okay to do anything you like as an act of love, if you're doing something in a spirit of hate, therefore it's not okay to do anything, is it? If you can do anything in a spirit of love, you can do nothing in a spirit of hate. So if they want to shut us down, they have to call us haters, right? So this is the natural consequence of situation ethics. If it's okay to do it in love, it ain't okay to do it in hate. And who decides who's hateful? The people who practice situation ethics. All of us are infected with this, people. Every single one of us to some degree or another. And it's rampant in our colleges, it's rampant in our churches, and it's destroying our society. And it came to you through a pro-Soviet communist who wanted to execute retarded children. Now, I want to talk, see, we were given, in my opinion, with the Trump election, and who believes there may have been a touch of the miraculous along that election, okay? I think even an atheist would have to acknowledge that, right? Okay? See, there is no substitute for executive power. See, most of us are like the French, partisans in World War II. We're behind enemy lines and we're blowing up trains and we're, attacking post offices and we're harassing the Nazis and we're working at a local level to do good stuff. But there is no substitute for the Allied forces storming the beaches at Normandy, right? There's no substitute for that. So President Trump was the start of that assault. And we have to make sure that assault continues until the Nazis and communists are exterminated and so badly defeated that they can never threaten us again for years and years and years. Now, so we need to actually start putting some things on the legislative agenda. We need to have things that we're aiming for. Now, a lot of people here have talked about education, and they've come up with some great solutions, great ideas. But we have to understand, to get rid of the plague that is political correctness in our education system, we have to transform that system, and that involves some legislation. I would say to you that the average young black kid in Alabama in the 1950s in the poorest school district got a far better education in the basics than any rich white kid in California today. Right? And you know what, people? That was before the Department of Education. We had no Department of Education for 200 years, and look how we suffered for it, right? So I think we have to put it back on the agenda. Abolish the Department of Education, get Trump to do that. All education back to the states. Remove all tenure for all professors in state-funded universities. There is no justification for Marxists aiming to destroy our society getting lifetime guaranteed jobs on our dime. None at all. And I also want to see an absolute reversal of Obama's policy of federal control of student loans. All that is a subsidy for the universities who use it to crank up tuition and pay their communist professors more money. Wouldn't it be fantastic in this country if 70% of kids left school to do an apprenticeship or go to trade school rather than go to college? Would not that transform the culture very, very quickly? And look at the churches now. If you want to listen to communism today, you want to find a communist speech, go to your church on Sunday. That is where you're going to find it more than anywhere else in this country now. So there's a couple of reasons for that. The Johnson Amendment, for instance, introduced by President Johnson before he became President Johnson, a man with lots of Marxists around him, wanted to get the churches out of the public square. So he introduced the Johnson Amendment saying you couldn't be involved in politics or you lose your tax-free status. Well, that gave every cowardly pastor in the country an excuse to shut their mouths. A few years after that passed, they took prayer out of schools, and a few years after that, you got Roe v. Wade. Do you think either of those things would have happened if the churches had been still involved? There's a very deliberate strategy here, folks. Now, President Trump has talked about abolishing this, and he sort of says he's done it, but he's made a recommendation. This needs to go through Congress, and it needs to be overturned. And I'll tell you something that's even more controversial that ultimately I'd like to see. I would like to see the end of all non-profit status for anybody in this country. Everybody pays tax. Churches, synagogues, Every single organisation. Do you think you'd be paying 35% tax if the churches had to pay tax too? Because they would be agitating like crazy. You want to get the churches out of the public square, you give them a protected, non-tax status, and they will stay there and shut up. And that has emasculated the churches in this country. If everybody paid tax, we'd all be paying 2%, and we'd all be doing pretty nicely, thanks very much. Okay? Now, United Nations, the fount of all evil. So why are we not talking about getting America out of it? You know, the John Birch Society, to their credit, has been one of the few organisations that has had this on their agenda for a long time. Well, right now, Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, who is elected on the coalition of conservative Catholics and evangelical Christians, who is getting, in his own words, the Marxist scum out of the education system, is going to pull Brazil, the fourth or fifth largest nation in the world, out of the United Nations. Okay? Now, President Trump has already pulled us out of two major United Nations organisations, UNESCO and another group, I can't remember, the UN Human Rights Commission. What an oxymoron that is. Well, we need to step that up, and we need to put that back on the agenda. To protect America's sovereignty, we must belong to no transnational organisation that threatens it. Now, the last little thing I'll talk about. President Trump has appointed over 100 judges conservative judges to court systems around the country, including 2 to the Supreme Court. That's going to have huge implications in the future, folks. But just, you know, in this country, you have had the Supreme Court has been controlled by the radical left for 60 years. And they have made bad decisions and called those precedents and put more bad decisions and more bad decisions and more bad decisions. So your religious rights, your gun rights, your 80% of what the federal government does is completely unconstitutional. And this has all been allowed to happen by increment. Well, now, finally, we have a majority, a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Now, I understand that Roberts is a flake, right? But he does vote more our way than against us. So it's not a secure position, but it's certainly an opportunity to bring a whole bunch of legislation that can transform this country back the way it should be. And this will happen if President Trump gets a second term. If he does. Now, one final point. If President Trump gets a second term, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting pretty old, people. Her health is not good. And she has publicly stated she would like to retire and settle in New Zealand. Okay? Okay? Well, I'm willing to take one for the team, people. Okay? You can send her down to New Zealand. She can play bingo all day long. And you will have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Okay? Would not that transform your culture in a positive way? Would that not do wonders for your Second Amendment rights, your First Amendment rights, your religious liberties, your education? You imagine the cases you could bring. So you imagine how much this country could be transformed at the end of a Trump presidency. 4 or 6 more years from now, how different this country could be. So I want to say to you people, I know what you do, I know how hard you work, and you're here to change the culture. Well, that's political, that's cultural, they go together. But we have to have a clear agenda in mind, and we have to put some of those hard things back on the political agenda. Nobody thought we were ever going to put the American embassy in Jerusalem, right? Every president promised it. None of them did it. Well, this one did. Okay? And this one will do a heck of a lot more things if we can give him back control of the House, if we can give him a reliable majority in the Senate so he doesn't have to put up with Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins anymore, and if we give him the opportunity to give us a 6-3, maybe even a 7-2 majority in the Supreme Court. Is this just pie in the sky, or is this possible, folks? It's possible if we double down and work hard. And for your future, for your children and grandchildren, is it too much to ask you to do everything you can over the next 18 months to make this happen? Yes. So thank you very much. I know you're behind enemy lines, but you're brave partisans, and I'm proud to be amongst you. So thank you. God bless America, and God bless California. Thank you. Thank you.